Hey guys, it's BB202, and today we're going to take a look at the history of dragons in LEGO Castle. Now, dragons weren't always a part of LEGO Castle, but starting in the 90s, they became an inseparable part of the theme and created a legacy that would last beyond even the traditional castle theme. And at the end of the video, we're going to talk about dragons appearing in other LEGO themes and what that looked like and how that's affected the company. Don't forget to subscribe, castle videos are all I make, and let's get into the video. Now we're going to go all the way back to the beginning and look at the very first dragons LEGO produced, and that was in 1993 with the Dragon Master sub-theme of LEGO Castle. This dragon appeared in sets like Fire Breathing Fortress and later Night Lord's Castle in the Fright Night sub-theme, and would continually appear in sets for about a decade. Now these dragons already from the start had a few things going for them, so LEGO was already doing some things right. First of all, they could seat a minifigure on their backs. They had a 2x2 plate back there that still exists even on most current dragons, and they came in multiple colors with black and green variants, and wing colors as well, ranging from red to trans neon orange and even a few more. They were also the easiest to obtain in a set out of any dragon produced since then because they were so small. But this is something that works against them as well. They would appear in cheap sets, it's true, but since they were so small and they were only about the size of 2 horses, they just weren't very threatening. When you want a big dragon on the battlefield, you want it to look intimidating, and ultimately these dragons just did not live up to that. They also had limited posability. Most of the dragon was made from one part, with a couple extra parts going to the very tip of the tail, which could swing side to side, the wing pieces, which could go up and down, and the tiny little arms that came out of the front of the piece. And that's a big problem, honestly. I get that they have a classic feel to them, and people who remember those dragons and have them in their collection have a certain sense of nostalgia for them, but if you got into Castle more recently, I wouldn't be surprised if you didn't like these dragons very much at all, especially with all the innovations LEGO's made since then. Next up, you have a pretty dramatic shift in LEGO's concept of a dragon build, and that's the Vikings theme, which was introduced in 2005. Immediately, you had sets like Viking Catapult versus the Nidhogg dragon, Viking Fortress against the Fafnir dragon, and in 2006, Viking Double Catapult versus the armored Ofnir dragon, and each of these dragons was significantly larger than LEGO's original dragon mold. Just a complete 180 on LEGO's part when it came to dragons. These were made from bionicle pieces, which gave them an almost mechanical feel, which some people are very lukewarm on, but it also gave them impressive size and posability. These dragons had really big tails, they were flexible in their knees, they can move their necks around, all sorts of things that previous dragons just couldn't do. So there are a lot of things working for them. They're imposing, but ultimately some people might think that they don't have the charm of the original dragons or the sleekness of the later dragons. Next up, we've got what many, I'm sure, would consider to be the best version of a dragon, and that's the so-called Fantasy Era dragon, introduced in 2007, the year after Vikings ended. This dragon appeared in sets like the Fantasy Era King's Castle, the Troll Warship, and even continued into the Castle 2013 theme in the set Dragon Mountain. This dragon was a compromise between the Vikings dragons in terms of size, and it even retained the Viking dragon wing piece, but it took a lot from the classic dragon in that it was kind of cartoonish compared to just terrifying in the Viking dragon's case. It even had printed eyes. There was a continued trend of increased articulation, not quite as much as the Viking dragons, but still, these were able to twist their tails in different directions, move their arms in a wider range, and even turn on their neck joint. They were the most realistic overall to date, and most in line with European folklore. I get that dragons are a myth, but this is how a dragon would be depicted in a medieval painting. Just don't take my word for it, and go look at a few. The dragons do look pretty similar. Personally, I'm going to be biased here, this is my favorite version of a dragon. I just think it looks good. It looks the most at home next to a minifigure. I just feel like they complement each other very well. And the final evolution of castle dragons we're going to cover here are the dragons that were introduced in Elves. And I know Elves isn't a castle theme, it's a castle adjacent mini doll theme instead of minifigures, but the dragons here I do feel took a lot of what LEGO had been experimenting with previous dragons and just took it to another level. By far, LEGO put the most time into designing these dragons. They're all very intricate, and they have a certain sleekness to them, made out of so many different parts, but still retain that charm that LEGO had with the Fantasy Era dragon and the original dragon. And I just think they're very well done. Now, these dragons were fairly affordable. You could find them even in medium-sized sets, and LEGO made so many of them that it was pretty easy to get one. There was always one on the shelves. And I think if Elves was a theme you were into, that was a big selling point. There was always a dragon available, and they all looked good. They looked like LEGO really cared about what they were making. So, not for everyone, not really for the audience of this channel, but I do have to give LEGO some props for doing a great job on those Elves dragons. One more thing I want to touch on in this video is how much LEGO's innovation making dragons for the castle theme has spilled out into other themes. A great example of that is Ninjago, which has recently become the quote-unquote dragon theme because every year there are at least a couple Ninjago dragons, and they're so very well done. But they all owe that to the research and effort LEGO was putting into designing dragons long before they were even a thought. There are other licensed parallels. The more recent Hungarian Horntail from Harry Potter borrows a lot in terms of construction from the Elves dragons. If LEGO hadn't been making Elves, would they have made a dragon that looked as nice as that Hungarian Horntail and even uses the same small ball socket joint piece? I don't know. Then there's the Smaug dragon from The Hobbit. Borrows a lot from how LEGO was building the Fantasy Era dragons, which admittedly was inspired by The Lord of the Rings and the Tolkien works. Even down to the neck joint connecting into the body, the tail joint, the way that connects is exactly how LEGO was doing it in Fantasy Era. So I think it's interesting to look at LEGO's timeline and see how these dragons have evolved. And clearly, castle is the common denominator, but how it branches out and affects different themes over time is very interesting. They have gone a little bit backwards recently. That dragon in the creator set sucks. Let's just admit it. It's only there just to fill up some pieces and be split apart into the different 3-in-1 builds, but it exists. It's a thing. I have to mention it. But it's very interesting how the dragons have evolved, and I'm interested to see where they go in the future, because you would think with how detailed these dragons are these days that LEGO can't possibly outdo themselves again until they surprise us, and I just wonder what that's going to look like. Let me know down in the comments below what your favorite style of dragon is, whether it's the classic style, the kind of Bionicle type, Vikings dragons, the Fantasy Era ones, the Elves ones, anything. And after you do that, tell me what your favorite individual dragon is. I would love to hear it, because I'm sure all of you are going to come up with something different. This is just one of those topics where you could have so many different answers. I want to thank you guys so much for watching this video. Don't forget to subscribe, stay tuned for something new, and I appreciate your support.